Hey guys, this is the Revolutionary Male. My name is Alex, and today I'm going to discuss the education of boys and the issues that boys are facing in education at this current time. I'm going to read this article from wokefather.com. I haven't read any other articles from this website, but this one seemed interesting as I stumbled across it in my research. So let's go ahead and get into it. Teachers, you are biased against boys and need to change. Think back to your first male teacher. How old were you? For me, I was already in middle school. Any of us who were once schoolboys can tell your education is a woman's world. Any of us who were once schoolboys can tell you, education is a woman's world. The OECD reports that in 2018, 79% of American college graduates in the education industry were women. And the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, just so you guys are aware. Yet, when we grew up, we were told we'd always had the upper hand. University admissions and funding gave women priority, even though they were already enrolled in higher numbers, something that has been the case since at least 1985. We were bombarded with feminist campaigns to encourage girls into college and STEM careers, but heard nothing about getting more boys into healthcare and the arts. Now society is reaping what it's sown for the past half century. Discriminated against from the first day of preschool, boys are giving up on school in record numbers. This year, male representation on college campuses hit an all-time low at 41.4%, and this article was written in 2020. Teachers, as someone who's worked in primary, secondary, and higher education for over 10 years now, I hate to break it to you, it's our fault. We have to change how we treat boys at school. Let's face it, the established narrative is that society discriminates against women and girls in all walks of life. Teachers, especially elementary school teachers, work off this assumption. Their intentions are good. They're aiming to balance the scales, but they don't actually have any argument for why they should do so. Indeed, this is the case. And as a man, I can confirm a lot of what he's saying here. In my experience, the vast majority of the teachers that I had were women, and the vast majority of the teachers that were kind of rougher on me, more difficult with me, were women. In fact, I had this one teacher in particular. I can't remember precisely what grade I was in. I might have been third or fourth grade. Who literally was claiming that I was not turning my assignments in. She was throwing my assignments away and pretending like I didn't do them. Thankfully, my parents defended me to her and went into the school and had it out with her. But I can't imagine what it would have been like if I hadn't been in a situation where I had parents who were willing to do that for me. Because apparently the problem that she had with me was that I rolled my eyes at her once or something, which is, incredibly ironic. You're a teacher. You're an adult. This is a boy, a child, maybe third or fourth grade. Deal with it. It's not that big a problem. But she decided to take out her animosity or whatever was driving it, I can't say, but she decided that she was just going to take it out on me. Indeed, the numbers show a completely different picture of gender in education, and numbers don't lie. It's boys who are discriminated against in school. Let's take a look. An OECD report called Grade Expectations found that teachers in nations across the developed world, including the United States, give girls higher grades for the same performance. The same report found that grades significantly influenced whether a student was going to pursue further education. Children tend to estimate their own abilities based on assessments by adults, like grades. Boys receive lower grades and think they're not capable. Consequently, girls in many OECD countries are as much as 2.5 times more likely to complete a college degree. This has an enormous effect on men as they get older. The lessons they learn as boys has an enormous impact on their development. And if you go through school and you are repeatedly punished or diminished or discriminated against in this way, of course you're going to hate school. Not to mention that most boys tend to learn differently than girls. Back in the 1990s, the entire educational system across the United States and much of the Western world was changed in a variety of ways to make it more appealing to girls. They got rid of recess, they got rid of a lot of practical learning, a lot of learning where you get to do things yourself. They got rid of a lot of physical activity and games that were beneficial for boys. And they created this new system where it's all based in sitting down in a classroom and having someone speak to you. That's the way women And girls tend to communicate and learn. Talking through their emotions, talking out their issues, having conversations, engaging in dialogue. Most boys tend to prefer to learn through doing things, practical learning. And the educational system's not really set up for that anymore. Let's continue on here. The OECD isn't the only organization to discover this bias. An MIT School Effectiveness and Inequality Initiative study found that middle school teachers gave girls higher scores when they knew their genders. The working paper goes on to discuss how these biases become self-fulfilling prophecies. Teachers expect boys to do poorly, grade them poorly, and then boys lag behind. According to the study, this bias accounts for 21% of boys falling behind girls in math during middle school. That's more than 1 in 5 boys. That's an enormous disadvantage that is being deliberately inflicted on these kids because the teachers don't like boys. They don't like the way boys learn. And so they punish them for it. I can't tell you how many women teachers I have dated. When I get into conversations with them about this stuff, I kind of point out, or when I inquire about the way that they treat boys versus the way that they treat girls, it's always the same. It's always the same. They have a different standard of behavior and a different standard of assessment for the boys versus the girls. And it's one that's privileged the girls enormously. U.S. News found that females had a 2.6 advantage over males when applying to the 478 ranked co-educational undergraduate institutions in the United States. It seems that teachers discriminate against boys all the way through college. Think about facing that repeatedly throughout your entire education. That's not going to incentivize you to get more of it. It's going to incentivize you to get less of it because it's going to enormously affect the way that you view yourself, your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your understanding of your own ability to learn and think. And it doesn't surprise me at all that this has been the response and that we've seen this in the actual world, the world of adults, where men are not going to college, they're not getting educations, they are falling behind in an incredible number of ways. The author continues, the discrimination has real-world consequences. Wages for men have been stagnant for 50 years. In fact, in 2017, they were even lower than they were in 1970. Meanwhile, over the same time frame, women's wages have seen a steady increase. Additionally, the Federal Reserve found that since the 1960s and 1970s, men have become increasingly vulnerable to unemployment. Although they were almost the same beforehand, the unemployment rate after the 2008 recession shot to 11% for men, but only 8.4% for women. And that, like, all this stuff includes things that's like the fundamental revolution that's happened in the economy. We used to have a muscle-based economy, an economy where you could get manual labor that would pay you a living wage where you could support a family. But that doesn't exist to the same degree that it once did. Instead, we now have a service economy, a mental economy, that is heavily advantaged towards women and the kind of labor they prefer and they are good at. So this disadvantages a lot of the men who are either not academically inclined, just generally speaking, they're less academically capable, or the kind of men who aren't as interested in education and going to school because they would rather do other things. So this hurts men significantly. We can talk numbers all day, but what does that mean for the next generation of men? Since 2009, I've worked in child care centers, preschools, elementary schools, high schools, and colleges. Let me tell you what I've seen. My town's high school has a giant purple feminist ribbon painted on the outside wall that you can see from the highway. The elementary school has a banner above the door declaring feminism in school. For International Women's Day on March 8th, the girls celebrated for a week. They had girls-only seminars and presentations with food and activities to encourage them into college and exciting careers. The boys had to hang back and do busy work. One 4th grade boy asked me, "Why isn't there a day for boys too?" I didn't have the heart to tell him that there is on November 19th, because then he'd just wonder why they hadn't gotten a week-long party too. This is also incredibly common in our culture now. Empowering girls at the expense of doing nothing for boys. And as a boy, I can even speak to this, growing up in a culture where you're not valued, you're not seen as important or worthy of protection or worthy of support or worthy of celebration, it creates an incredibly devastating self-image that will affect these men for the rest of their lives. I know it's something I've had to deal with myself. I have had to deal with a lot of other issues because I had a very traumatic childhood with lots of abuse. But this is destructive and it needs to change. Children are incredibly impressionable. Yes, they are. And they have an enormous desire for acceptance and love. Even if you do subscribe to the feminist claim that society has been dominated by men who subjugate women, what does an 8-year-old boy in 2020 have to do with it? Exactly. What does a man in 2020 have to do with it? Let's even forget about the fact that the patriarchal argument, the theory of patriarchy, the patriarchy theory is a bunch of nonsense. What do these boys have to do, and the men today have to do with anything that happened 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago? We don't live in that world, but we act like, and we have a culture that tells us that that's the world that we still live in. So it's not even just a problem of the past, it's a problem of the present as well, and the future apparently, because apparently the future is female. This blatant discrimination by the school system makes boys feel less valued. We should treat all children equally. Of course, it's not just feminist teachers getting overly political. Boys and girls are different. They behave differently and they learn differently. Teachers, however, are biased against the boys. It's a regular occurrence that I see a girl pestering a boy who's trying to concentrate, yet the boy gets punished while the girl gets off scot-free. Starting in preschool, teachers assume boys will be the troublemakers. Just like with grades, this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When a boy keeps getting sent to the corner, even though he isn't misbehaving any more than the girls are, he'll eventually just accept that he's a bad kid. Exactly. And this is something that I've encountered in the female teachers I've dated. They don't apply the same standard. They see the boy's behavior as bad, and even when the girl does the same exact thing, they see it as fine, as acceptable. Because in our society, girls are inherently valuable. Boys are not. Boys are not valuable and do not become valuable unless they create value in the world. That's the only time. They have to be exceptional, either as athletes or performers in some way, as some kind of exceptional musician, or they have to go out and provide value to other people as men. That's the only time that boys and men are validated, supported, and loved, is when they do for others. Our society does not think that we are inherently valuable as people. But let's give teachers the benefit of the doubt. After all, boys are more likely to suffer from diseases like ADHD that cause them to misbehave. So then, why don't schools adapt to that? Instead, the amount of medication doled out to drug these boys into concentrating has increased by 800% in the last 2 decades. Interestingly, this correlates to the time frame when boys began to lag behind in education. Yes, because the entire educational system was modified so that girls could adapt to it, to be adapted to the way that girls learn, with no concern for boys whatsoever. Think about if this was the other way around. There would be outrage. But again, our society doesn't care about boys. Imagine, I need a drink. Think about this. Imagine a campaign where we were telling boys every single day how special they are and empowered they are and that they're great for just being who they are. Think about how feminists and the culture at large will react to that. And think about the kind of boys and men it would produce. The way it's produced so many narcissistic, entitled, girls and women. This is crazy. If we're going to do this, we got to do it for everybody. All right, let's see. Imagine a class of all boys. More than 1 in 10 of them would have ADHD. That's too many to just drug and forget about it. You would have to adapt your teaching style and classroom environment to those children. However, mix in girls who are half as likely to get diagnosed with ADHD and less likely to act out even when they are. Well, you can't just sit those misbehaving boys in the back and let the Adderall take care of it. The fact is, the foundation of modern education is sitting still, doing what you're told, and following society's expectations. All things that, quite frankly, girls are better at. That's not opinion. Studies have found that quote-unquote misbehavior in boys is directly linked to exposure to male hormones in utero. That's the difference here, fellas. We are different than girls. Boys are different than girls. Testosterone is, and other male hormones, are why boys act the way that they do. They're not just bad kids or bad people, but that's how they're being treated and discriminated against in education. Okay, my fellow teachers, how do we need to change? Don't worry, I have a list. Number one, at least address the issue. Educational institutions and the media are finally beginning to realize and admit that discrimination against boys exists. Yet, they twist it into more evidence of female disadvantage. Take a look at this article from the BBC. The fact that teachers give girls better grades for the same work is somehow spun as evidence that women are penalized in the labor market. Ridiculous. It's time we admit it. Boys are disadvantaged at school. Boys can be the beneficiaries of gender equity in education, period. I'm going to open up that article. I might make a video out of it. Number two, remove feminist political ideology from schools. Obviously, schools should still teach the Western ideal of gender equality, but we all know feminism is more than that. It's a political movement based on debatable social and political theory. That's fine, but it has no place in our children's education, whether it's elementary school or the universities. Number three, get more men in education. There's a huge push to get women in STEM. Why don't we have the same initiatives to encourage men to be elementary school teachers? I'll tell you why. Because they don't want men involved with kids. There's an inherent bias there. There's an inherent bias against men engaging in any way with little kids. There used to be airline policies, I don't know if there still are, where if a man was seated next to an unattended child, the airline would force him to move to a different seat, and the plane wouldn't take off unless he did, because he was presumed to be a pedophile. There is inherent bias in this that runs really, really deep. Women have been liberated to such an extent where every single part of the social world, the economic world, the political world has been modified and changed and accommodated so that women could participate. All the areas that men tended to be predominantly involved in have been opened up to women, but the reverse has not happened for men. Men have not been invited into the parts of the world that have been predominantly dominated by women. And one of the reasons for that is because they don't want them around. They don't want us there. They don't want us there. And another problem is men also recognize that all of those areas are the kinds of areas where if men go into those fields, they won't be adequately rewarded for it. There's no incentive on that side either. Because who wants to marry a man who's a teacher? That's the belief. Men are only rewarded by women when they achieve something significant, something more than that woman has achieved. And it's, especially in this economy now, incredibly unlikely where an average female teacher wants to marry another average female male teacher. It just doesn't work that way. Men don't go into fields where they aren't going to be financially rewarded because they know they have to earn money in order to get women, to have a family. So they would rather go do something they hate doing that gets paid better than go do something that might be more fulfilling, like being a teacher. Number 4, adapt education to boys instead of drugging them. I don't doubt that some children legitimately need ADHD medication to improve their lives, but 800% more than in 1995? We all know that's insanity. Let boys be active and physical. Teachers, decrease the amount of time you spend getting your class to sit still all day. Being obedient listeners. Increase the amount of time they can spend expanding as individuals and learning critical thinking. This means more personalized activities and more active movement. Number 5, tell boys they're valuable for who they are. As a teacher, all your students are different. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. They learn differently and respond to different motivations. Make sure the boys you teach are loved and know that they have the same support that you make such a prominent point of giving to the girls. This is an important issue, and it's something that we need to talk about more. And unfortunately, the reality is, unless more and more men start speaking out about this stuff, start complaining about this stuff, which I know is not very masculine, none of this stuff is ever going to change. And our sons, and our sons' sons, and our cousins, our brothers are going to be punished for it. We have to care more about ourselves as men than society does to turn this stuff around. Well, that's the end of the article, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you didn't enjoy it, go ahead and hit the dislike button. Tell me why. If you want to leave a comment, please do so in the section below. If you want to contact me directly, go ahead and email me at revolutionarymail@gmail.com. Again, I guess that's all. My name is Alex, fellas. This has been the Revolutionary Mail. Thank you for watching.